Um, Will Fleeson will be joining us from Wake Forest University in North Carolina, and he's going to talk to us about who are the most moral among us. So who might maybe inspire us to greater heights of well-doing. Thanks, Will.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Falk, and your team for putting this conference on. I am so impressed with this conference. It's huge. It's got so many rich things going on. It's really interesting. And you put it together all in like just a couple of months. And it's amazing to me. And I think you, sir, have identified a need. My talk today is going to be trying to introduce the study of the morally exceptional as a powerful way to develop knowledge about morality and about motivation. Let me give you some examples. So, for example, Peter Verona, he was a Polish locksmith in Warsaw during World War II. Every day when he went to his workshop, he encountered starving children. I could not move backwards or forwards. I was all surrounded, and they begged me with cries, imploring me for food. The hands that were turned to me were not hands. They were just bones covered with skin. These children were kept in a church. They looked inhuman. They looked like ghosts. You know what it is when a human being is starved? One is capable of doing anything. These were helpless children who were swarming me in the hope of receiving something to eat. So I would bring 5 rolls. I could not pass through the gates with more. The Germans would not let me. Another example is Shirley Chisholm. She was the first Black woman elected to Congress in the United States in 1968. And as you can imagine, she fought a lot of racism and a lot of sexism along the way, but she kept getting stronger and stronger to the point where she actually ran for president in 1972 with the slogan, which was also the title of her book, which was Unbought and Unbossed, which demonstrates her unwavering commitment to doing what is right. Her determination is what paved the way, really, for what's going on today. And many of you are familiar with Rachel Glenister and Michael Kramer. They started as just humble aid workers in Africa, but they wanted to make sure that their work was not being wasted, that it was being effective. So they decided to try out randomized control trials on the effectiveness of different efforts. And they discovered some surprising findings. For example, that if you want to enhance the education of children, getting them more textbooks does not work very well. What does work well is treating intestinal worms. The education level goes way up when you do that. This was very exciting to people, and randomized control trials spread throughout the international aid world, and these people made the lives of millions in the world better. I think this question of studying the morally exceptional is important and relevant to life improvement science for a few reasons. First, the morally exceptional show us morality at its best. The system is functioning as well as it can, so we can see how it functions. We can see the moral system as clearly as possible when we're looking at the morally exceptional. It's sort of like when we study intelligence by looking at the gifted, or when we study businesses by looking at the best, most successful businesses, or when we study literature, we read the best literature. Another reason is that I think if we study the morally exceptional, we can begin to identify what the causal factors are that lead to people becoming more moral, to contributing more to the well-doing of others. Third, I think focusing on the morally exceptional helps us stay basic in our approach. Why directly addressing applied questions is going to be important in a life improvement science. The problem is, in the long term, basic research questions may do more to enhance well-doing. And this is slightly more towards the basic side because it just studies what makes these people moral. And then finally, morally exceptional people are just fascinating. I mean, are they happy or are they miserable? Are they dull? Do they live dull lives? Are they always in pain? Do they live rich lives? Are they liked, or people find them insufferable? Do they have a secret dark side? So who qualifies as morally exceptional? This is a philosophical problem. It's very difficult to say. I'm going to use a very loose definition in this research, which is, people who do something relevant to morality, people who do something, beyond the norms or expectations of normal behavior, and people from a wide variety of domains. So, for example, here's some of the domains that I've looked at the research in. First is Holocaust rescuers, people who risk their lives to take Jews in their homes. Social activists, people who devote themselves to liberation. Whistleblowers, people who risk careers and imprisonment by bringing it to attention some wrongdoing. Charity superstars, people who spend a ton of time on charity and do great things with charity. Career devotees, these are people who devote their careers to doing good. And then people who are just at the top percent of moral dimensions, individual differences in morality, the top 1 to 2% of these people. I'm going to give you this example a little bit longer. This is a childhood hero of mine, Alan Page. Here he is sacking the dreaded Cowboys. Hated, not dreaded, I should say. Alan Page was the first person to win the most valuable player in the American National Football League. He was great, and he went on to become in the Hall of Fame, Football Hall of Fame. So that's exceptional. But he didn't stop there. He decided after that to go to law school, and he actually went to law school and completed his law degree, became a lawyer. But he didn't stop there. He then became the first African-American justice on the Minnesota Supreme Court. Now that alone is exceptional. But when you put that together with being the most valuable football player in the country, in the league, that's incredible. It's a little bit mind-boggling. But he didn't stop there. He and his wife got together and created a foundation and raised more than $14 million for college scholarships. That is exceptional. But that was only the third thing he did. And then finally, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the nation's highest award we can give to civilians. I'll come back to him in a little bit. So the question is, why did morally exceptional people, these people that are morally exceptional, why did they become morally exceptional? And this is going to identify the factors that we can then try to research to understand what will improve life well-doing. So I reviewed research from a wide variety of investigators, wide variety of moral domains. And they do studies, it's a lot of retrospective studies. But they often have comparison groups. So they'll take someone, for example, they'll do interviews with people who rescued Jews, and then they'll also do interviews with Germans who didn't rescue Jews, and they'll do interviews with Jews who were rescued and compare those, things like that. So it's kind of retrospective qualitative work. But the work has consistently identified 6 categories of factors that lead to people becoming morally exceptional. Social structures, those are broader, bigger situations, and then the more proximate, smaller situations. Development, personality traits, moral reasoning, and identity. I'll go through each of those. Starting with social structures. People who rescued Jews, most of the work I'm going to talk about comes from Holocaust rescuers, but not all of it. People who rescued Jews during the war had a pre-war respect for, interactions with, and friendships to Jews. So they had a social structure set up where they were interacting with each other. They also, while they were rescuing Jews, had local supportive leadership. The leadership in their village or community was in support of rescuing Jews. Furthermore, they had available social material support. So they were given food and money to manage it, to make it possible to hide a Jew for several years in your house, for example. Same kind of things have been found with bully victim defenders. People who defend bully victims tend to be in communities where the leadership is supportive and they have support, active support. Whistleblowers, the same things. Whistleblowers tend to blow the whistle more in communities or organizations where there's support for whistleblowing, where they have local people around them who are going to support them in their activities. Same thing with proximate situations. People who rescued Jews during the war tended to be fairly distant from witnesses that might see it. And they had good hiding places where they could hide the Jews so they wouldn't be found out. Because, you know, if there was a witness, not only would the Jew be found out, but you would probably also die. Another powerful proximate situation is that you being directly asked to help. So if someone comes to you and says, "Can you save my life?" it's pretty hard to resist that. Same kind of things with, for example, organ donors. Kidney donors are more likely to donate their kidneys to strangers if they know that if one of their family members later needs a kidney, that their family member will go to the top of the list. So that's so extra support there. Whistleblowers are much more likely to blow the whistle when they have clear, strong, documented evidence so that they'll be able to prove their case. If they don't have clear, strong evidence, they're not likely to do it. All right, developmental history. Kids, people who grow up to be morally exceptional tend to have been, when they were kids, in families that had less frequent discipline, and that discipline was more reasoned. It was rationalized rather than just administered. They grew up in families that valued universalist ethics, and they had altruistic parents. People who won awards for charity have reported positive childhood attachments with their parents. And the other thing that they reported is this early appearance of an integrated instrumental agency with a terminal communal motivation. So what that means is that they definitely were interested in power and achievement. It's not that they didn't want those things, those self-agglomerating, grandizing motivations. They had those motives, but they were instrumental because their terminal motivation was communal. So for example, the suffragette Emmeline Pankhurst spoke of she fighting for rights. She fought hard for rights because she was doing it in the service of the betterment of women. So she had this agentic motivation that was instrumental for this terminal communal motivation of bettering people. Personality traits are relevant. So sort of three packages. The first package is high empathy, social responsibility, connection to others. This really feeling close to other people and feeling other people's pain. Second package is integrity, honesty, and universal moral values. People who are morally exceptional tend to have strong moral beliefs. The third package is this independent self-reliance, risk-taking, sense of adventure, and internal sense of control. They're people who take risks and have adventures. And again, they tend to often have this integrated profile of instrumental agentic motivation that's in the service of terminal communal motivation. Moral reasoning, they tend to differ in moral reasoning. People who do morally exceptional actions tend to identify ethical, humanitarian, and universal reasons. They use high-level abstract moral reasoning when they're explaining why they did it. They'll say things like, Jewish people are just the same as everybody else. They're just the same as me. If I think that people should try to save others in situations like this. People have a right to lives. So these high-level abstract moral reasonings. Finally, people who are morally exceptional tend to have different kinds of identities from others. They tend to include their connection to others as part of themselves, as who they are. They see themselves inherently as connected to other people. In particular, they see all of humanity as the same as themselves. So they see themselves as basically interchangeable with anyone in the world and as having the same needs and being almost the same person. And then furthermore, they define themselves as moral. Being moral is an identifying characteristic of them, not an additional thing, but something that defines who they are as people. So again, let me just say what's the quality of this evidence? Well, it's retrospective, it's narrative. So, it's not great. That's the weak sides of the evidence. On the other hand, the findings are consistent across domains and they're consistent across investigators. So if you look at different domains of morally exceptional people, you find the same kind of results. If you have different researchers do it, you find the same kind of results. They use comparison groups. So I would say this evidence is good, but it's preliminary. This is the kind of study that says we should be doing higher quality research on these factors to see if we can identify, are they the things that make people morally strong? I'm going to address in a little bit more length this question of imbalance or balance. So it's true, these people who are morally exceptional have a deep, abiding concern for others, very strong motivation to help others. And they take grave risks in those efforts. This raises the question, are they maybe motivationally imbalanced? Could be some kind of unhealthy imbalance such that they care so much about doing good that they engage in an unhealthy neglect of their own basic needs. So for example, it might be that they've increased their other serving needs up to 80 so that their self-serving needs just drop down to 20 and they neglect them and they're unhealthy. We, after examining this evidence, have come to a different conclusion. And following a long tradition in philosophy, starting with Socrates and Aristotle, continuing to modern day writers like Rawls and Parfit, we believe that the deep concern for others exhibited by the morally exceptional is actually the correct balance that's appropriate, self-affirming, and enhancing of life quality. What we believe is that what these people that are morally exceptional have done is brought their other serving needs up to balance, to at least in the range of their self-serving needs, so that they can have dialogue between when they should care about their self-serving needs and when they should care about their other serving needs. So as they brought it up, they still have strong self-serving needs. It's just that they're now a little bit closer and they can have a dialogue. What's the evidential rationale for this conclusion or speculation? Well, first of all, this data is, like I said, retrospective, but consistent across all those domains and investigators. These people that are morally exceptional do not take reckless risks. For example, at Peter Verona, he only brought 5 rolls. He knew 5 rolls is not enough bread for a swarm of children that are starving. But that's all he could do. He still took a risk when he did that, but if he brought more than 5, he'd be killed. And he wasn't going to make himself obviously in danger, instantly at risk of death. But he did increase his risk of death to some degree in order to bring down the risk of death a great degree for other people. Seems like a fair balance. Same thing with defenders of bully victims. They take risks. They could become the victim themselves. So they're taking this risk, but they don't do it just willy-nilly. They wait till they've got support of a school, for example. They wait till they have people around them. It's usually more popular people who defend bully victims, so they've got friends. Same thing with whistleblowers. Whistleblowers did not take reckless risks. They don't just blow the whistle whenever they get a hunch or they're sure. They wait till they have clear documented evidence that nobody will be able to deny. And of course, people still deny it. More evidence that suggests that these are healthy people. One is that they come from healthy families, right? Families where people are loving, altruistic, universal moral values, don't discipline that harshly. That sounds like a good, healthy family. It doesn't sound like that would lead to an unhealthy balance. They have more sophisticated moral reasoning. And they have this integrated motivation of instrumental agency plus terminal convenience. It's not like they give up their agency motivation. They continue that. But they just no longer, they don't have that be the only thing. So what the idea is that their concern from others has become deep and strong enough to be brought into conversation with the deep and strong concern for their own self-serving needs. In fact, it's quite possible that the normal case is imbalanced. That normal people have an imbalanced, unhealthy profile motivation. And you saw several talks of that already in this symposium that suggested the same thing. So it could be that normal, healthy people have gotten so dazzled or frightened or distracted by fear and greed that they've lost track of their desire to help others, and it's atrophied. Like, let me give you an example from the war again. Some Germans came to a rescuer's house and searched for Jewish people in that. It was a farm, so they went out in the farm searching for Jewish people. And the children were kept in a room while this was on, and they asked some Polish citizens to guard the children while the Germans went looking. And the children, of course, realized what was going on. They tried to escape. They tried to jump out the window and get away. And these Polish citizens stopped the children, made them come back in the room, and when the Germans came back, they killed the kids, executed the children. And so one of the witnesses said, how his conscience allowed him to do this, I don't know. In those days at the Baronet's farm, we were terrorized and paralyzed into inaction. And that's the feeling that I think what happens when you put your own interests ahead of other people's interests to such a dramatic degree. The truth is, most adults, as they get older, get this balance of motivations more and more as they age. So, in conclusion, what factors appear to be important to well-doing based on what we've learned about the morally exceptional? Well, first, several supportive social environments, supportive leadership, supportive power and resources, risk mitigation. Those are important for encouraging people to be morally moral. When it comes to development, we need affectionate families with modest, rationalized discipline and strong universalist ethics. When it comes to personality traits, there's a lot of personality traits that are relevant, including empathy, identification with all humanity, and a sense of adventure. The motivational profile tends to be an instrumental agency with a terminal communal motivation. Their moral reasoning that leads to being more moral tends to be high level, universalized. And they might have a more even balance between their self-serving and other-serving motivations, rather than this atrophy of the other-serving motivation. Thank you very much. Oh no, I just got the 5.
Do you have any backup slides you want to present? Otherwise, we could have
I
a long
got
conversation.
bonus points for stopping early.
Well, thanks, Will. That was a very compelling talk, and we had some time for questions. So go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to ask Will a question. You convinced everyone. Oh wait, not Igor. Here we go.
Oh, good. Igor will tell me the truth.
Okay, so thanks so much, Will. This was fascinating. And let me, I guess, no, I will not turn on my camera because, well, it doesn't really matter. So there are 2 questions that I posted in the forum as well, in the discussion list, that I think you probably grappled a lot with, both from me as well as from other people before. And the first question, and they're interrelated in a certain way. The first question is about how culturally mediated all these insights about what morally exceptional means, what the developmental processes are, what the personality features are, and what the social contexts are. Because surely one can think of moral exceptionality in terms of some kind of Confucian ethics on the one hand. And one can also think about it in terms of Aristotelian ethics. And one can also think about it in terms of Rawlsian principles. And they are, to some extent, overlapping, but they also highlight some somewhat different features. So in general, the picture that you created seems to be very agentic, individual-focused, iconoclastic to some extent, of course, reasonable, nevertheless, fairly individualist. And I wonder how culturally mediated these constructs are, and how do you normally handle this question? I mean, you kind of alluded that there are limitations. So maybe I'll start with this question.
Yeah, that's not one question, though. So you've given me the opportunity to pick and choose which question I answer. So I will do that, and then you
Sure.
tell me which questions I didn't get to enough. Is that okay? So I'll start with cultural mediation. So or cultural. No, let me start with the individualistic thing. So the way this worked was fairly atheoretical. In that we just identified people that looked like they might be morally exceptional. You know, so they did something relevant to morality, and it was unusual and somewhat extreme. And then we just kind of went through all of the literature on people like that and tried to identify factors that they had in common. It could have been any kind of factor. So those are the ones we found out. So we were atheoretical in identifying the factors. You know, it's possible because these were narrative retrospective beliefs or reports that people reported things that fit their cultural narrative. That is quite possible, and that needs to be addressed. We have no answer. It's quite possible that that's true, but at least we started off atheoretical and just looking at the literature. The one place where, of course, we had our interjections. No, the other thing I want to say about this individualistic collectivist thing is, so what we found, in fact, is kind of an anti-individualistic message in a way. We found that people who are morally exceptional tend to have a deep identification with other people and a deep concern for other people as part of who they are, as part of their identity. So in a sense, it's a move towards a collectivist kind of idea. They still have a strong agentic motivation. And so that's what I found that also interesting. They don't give up their own interests. They keep them in balance with those other interests. And that's the part that's individualistic, maybe, that you were identifying. But in terms of who do we identify as morally exceptional, right? So that is clearly biased by culture, the people that we started with. And there's no question about that. And for example, there's Buddhist, Confucianist identifications of who's moral that might be different. And so we've done some research on trying to figure out who gets identified as morally exceptional. And that's just in the beginning stages. But what it looks like is that people pretty much identify the same kinds of people. They just differ in the ends towards which they are directed. So someone might predict some sort of, right-wing politician, and someone else may pick a left-wing politician. But then when you ask them what features those people have, they'll identify the same features. It's just that they're directed in a different direction. So the ends, people differ in who they identify based on their ends, but they tend to identify similar features. But that's just really nascent research. How'd I do, Igor? Anything I left out of critical interest there?
Igor's disappeared from my list.
Oh, no.
To unmute.
Okay.
There.
No, you did great. I mean, I think, we have to be mindful that when we start with any examination of narratives, that they are obviously culturally bound. I do find it fascinating, as you said, that there is a convergence, irrespective of whether your ideological beliefs or maybe even cultural backgrounds, even though I don't know if you've done that enough yet, where you come from, but you still kind of end up with a similar type of ideas. But I do think it's very important to keep in mind this kind of cultural embeddedness and contextual embeddedness whenever we talk about the exceptional, in part because what isn't exceptional in one context may not be considered exceptional or even moral in a completely different context.
Yeah. And this is the kind of thing, like I think David was talking about yesterday when he said, you don't have to do something new. Pick up something that other people have done, but they haven't done it well enough yet. And then try to do research on that to do it better. I think that's one of the messages he was making yesterday. And I think this would be some examples of that.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Next, we have John.
Hi, thanks for that. That was super fascinating. First of all, I just want to preface this comment by saying that I'm very conscientious of the fact that I've already asked 3 questions already, and I feel a little bit guilty for taking up time, but I hope it's okay. It seems like we're having enough time for questions so far, so I don't seem to be inconveniencing anyone else at the moment. But in any case, I'm going to carry on with my question. So yes, the talk was fascinating. It seemed like you synthesized a range of insights from a whole body of literature that sort of like transcends a bunch of different disciplinary boundaries. So I really appreciated the contributions that you made just then. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a background to this comment, just because you might find it interesting and you may have some additional comments once I make that background a little bit clearer. So part of the reason why I'm so interested in your talk is because I'm working on this project called the Meta Changemakers Project, which I'm just linking in the chat now. And the focus of this project is to better understand how to cultivate change makers, people with the motivation and competence to make a positive impact in the world, to address challenges and so forth. And it seems to me like you can think of change makers as being more or less similar to people who would be very moral in your sense. I mean, it definitely seems like your moral exemplars are examples of change makers. You could also think of change makers as being well-doers. It seems like we have different terminology to refer to more or less the same thing. So in a sense, then, it seems like what you're doing is presenting a set of ingredients, you might think, that go into creating a change maker, a well-doer, a moral exemplar. And so my question for you, given that I'm working on this project where we're looking to essentially figure out what those ingredients are and to integrate them into educational programs, my question for you is, given all of the insights that you just presented, to what extent do you think that they can, should, or are currently informing educational programs to make moral exemplars or change makers, well-doers, whatever you want to call them?
Great summary of the talk. Thank you. You clearly got it exactly right. So but the question is, how much is this kind of research informed educational efforts? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I would say not a lot yet. On educational, educational efforts, in particular, towards making people into changers. I would say not especially a lot. So, you know, a lot of the educational effort right now is focused on making people be leaders and find their passion, right? So that's the educational emphasis that you see really strongly in you know, both K-12 and in secondary education. And so, I think that what would be nice, and part of the reason we started this project on the morally exceptional, it'd be nice if schools could move that interest in leadership and passion a little bit more towards doing morally good things, and rather than just self-centered good things. In fact, it might make the kids healthier or happier, according to the earlier talks this morning, whatever, late this night. It might make the kids happier and healthier if we did shift away a little bit from finding your personal leadership or your personal passion towards directing those same ideas, but towards doing good for others.